Magnus Carlsen sat out the first 2 rounds of the European Team Championship. He was waiting till Norway faced stronger opposition, and in round 3 they got it. The pairing was Norway against Armenia, which meant that Carlsen would face his old adversary Levon Aronian. So let's take a look at that game. So Carlsen with the white pieces. It was a Spanish, it was a Berlin, and Carlsen kept it closed with 4d3, and you can see after 12 moves they've reached a position which is very tight indeed. Symmetrical pawn structure. You could say that white perhaps has a very slight advantage because of this little bit of activity with the knight, but it's very balanced. But this is the kind of position that Carlsen excels in. Let's see. He played bishop g5. So white is obviously just a bit more active than black. So after h6, Aronian puts the question to the bishop. Now that bishop can retreat to h4. And then, probably something like bishop e6. And later on, well, you never know, g5 might come to break that pin. But Magnus isn't afraid of a challenge. And instead of playing the normal move, bishop h4, he actually exchanged on f6. Now, there would be no point in giving up this fine bishop if it weren't for the fact that Magnus has spied a loose pawn at the side of the board. So he snapped this pawn off. Okay, what compensation does black have for this? Well, Aronian has 2 bishops. That's the first thing. So 2 bishops against bishop and knight. So that's something in itself. But unless you can open the position in some way, then that's purely a theoretical kind of advantage in the position. Black needs to prove that he has strong compensation for this pawn. And Aronian did that by playing d5. Very good move. First point is that this prevents the knight retreating back into the centre of the board. It also starts to open up the position. Very important with those bishops. Now, a tactical point. If white takes that pawn on d5, then queen d8 is a bit embarrassing, hitting both pieces. Now, white can survive this for the moment by taking this pawn, but actually black wins that piece, and although white has lots of pawns, it should be better for black. So Carlsen, after d5, very quickly he dropped his bishop back. So he would perhaps like to bring the knight back via b3. But Aronian played with great energy at this point, and maybe his simple response in this position perhaps surprised Carlsen. He just exchanged on e4. But the point of this was to open up the d-file, and now Aronian manages to use this d-file extremely well. If white plays the natural move queen e2 here, then either queen f4 or queen g5, threatening bishop g4, also threatening rook d2, and that's a bit awkward to meet. So Carlsen, after, well, an 18-minute thought, played queen e1. Not exactly ideal, and Aronian really takes control here, really seizes the initiative. So after queen g5, obviously black starts to threaten moves like bishop h3, so the king goes in the corner. But queen g5 had a dual purpose. It allows the rook to come into d2, very nasty. Well, white would just like to play the rook over to c1, but there's a tactical problem with this one. Okay, you can see this bishop slices down across the board, and there is a loose rook on c1. So rooks, the natural move rook c1 not possible, so the bishop had to retreat to the back rank. That splits the heavy pieces, and this looks a bit unpleasant. Bishop e6 is a good move from black here. If rook takes b2, then knight c4 is rather uncomfortable. That rook has no decent squares. So bishop e6, excellent move, and also that just prepares to bring the second rook into the game and also covers these squares. So now rook takes b2 could well be a threat. So b4, and the second rook came into the game. And here, well, I get the impression in this game that Magnus is just kind of pushing things to the limit the whole time. Knight takes a5, already a bit risky, and that knight snapped off another pawn in this position, which was definitely a big mistake. Carlsen should just play bishop here, and well, there's no doubt that black has very good compensation for the pawn. 2 bishops, fantastic major pieces. But white should play like that. Instead, Carlsen took the pawn on b7, and this actually was met with a convincing refutation. Bishop c4. First thing to note is if that rook moves to the side, then bishop takes f2 is winning. So Magnus has to keep hacking on. He took the rook. The rook got taken on f1. Queen takes f1, and now rook takes f2 is winning material. Obviously, the queen has to keep hold of g2, so queen g1 forced. And now rook a2, a nasty discovered attack. Once again, this bishop on a7 slicing across the board, and that is a heavy blow for white. Carlsen had to give up the queen at this point, so he took the rook. And here, well, queen takes knight is possible, but Aronian played a much stronger move. He grabbed the bishop on d1 instead. And here, although Carlsen manages to take lots of pawns, in fact that queen is just a deadly piece in this position. It manages to disturb white's coordination, keeps hitting all these loose pieces, and finally takes off another pawn. And well, I mean, the game went on for another over another 10 moves or so, but the result was never in doubt. The loose pieces just can't maintain coordination, and it's pretty easy for the queen to win this game with a pawn advance. So an excellent win for Aronian, but what a blow for Carlsen, who starts off with a loss in this tournament, demoralising for the Norwegian team. Let me show you another game from today, and this just put a smile on my face. The game between Richard Rapport and Laurent Fressinet from the Hungary-France match. Richard Rapport, well, those of you, I'm sure, who follow this channel and follow Top Chess will know Richard Rapport very well. An absolutely wild player, doesn't mind playing really unorthodox openings, always has a keen eye for the attack. He played 1 f4 in this game, and well, I mean, the opening it turned from a kind of Dutch into a kind of Grunfeld, actually, after these moves. I haven't got time to go through the whole game. I'm going to leap forward. So it's a kind of Grunfeld, except this pawn is on f4, but it worked out extremely well for Richard Rapport. He's a pawn up in this position. That's an extra pawn there. And he's managed to embed this knight on d6, a fantastic square. Should be a winning position for white, but still got to put the boot in. That knight in particular is a strong piece on a nice outpost, so it's not completely simple. But here Fressinet made a bad mistake. Queen a6. Well, it's fantastic to see how Rapport exploited the loose queen here. He played f5. Well, if you're going to start with f4, ultimately that's the move you want to get in. f5 to smash open black's king. Let's see what happened. This got taken, and rook takes f5. Fantastic stuff. This was taken. Well, otherwise f7 is caving in. And rook g4 check. This got taken, and now we can see the point. This diagonal opens up, and that queen goes on a6. So black has 2 rooks for the queen, but this is a very strong passed pawn. The knight is still fantastic on d6. Black's king is starting to open up, and let's see how Rapport exploited this. Well, of course, it looks great for white, but it's hard to imagine that the game would just be over in a few moves. Let's see what happened. E6. So this is the first really nice move. That just opens up black's king a little more. Queen A4. Great move. Hitting the rook and also preparing to swing back to the king's side. And this is the hardest working queen in round 3 of the European Team Championship. This is absolutely fantastic. Look how this queen has switched round the board. Absolutely brilliant. It's like a heat-seeking missile. And now black's king ripped open. There's no defence. King in the corner. Knight check. If the king steps up, then bishop c3 is fatal. So king g8. Knight h6 check once again if the king steps up. Bishop c3 is really nice. After king takes, this is going to lead to mate very quickly. For instance here, I mean there are other variations, but that one is pretty typical. So knight h6 check. King went in the corner, but that lost straight away to queen g8 mate. Wow. Powerful stuff from Rapport. Great to see him in action. Let me just finish with one other game, and this was from the match between the Faroe Islands and Switzerland. And we have Joe Gallagher representing Switzerland in action here. Well, Joe is a piece up. There are lots of ways for black to win this position. White has just pushed this pawn, but let's see how Joe did it. Very nice finish. Knight g5. Obviously that pawn couldn't be taken because the king would take the knight. So the knight switches back. b6. Of course, one can just stop that pawn, but instead Joe, ever the artist, found a checkmate. And white's king is caught in a mating net. Always nice to finish with a checkmate. 2 checkmates. So things are really hotting up. After 3 rounds, there are just 2 teams with 100%. Ukraine and Russia with 6 points each, and they face each other in round 4. And in fact, there are only 2 teams on 5 points, France and Serbia, and they face each other in round 4. So do join me for more reports coming up soon.